What's up everybody, welcome back. So we have been working on this weapon setup with data tables and structures, and we can actually switch weapons, but we need to make sure that our animations update as well, so everything comes together. So in this video we're gonna wrap things up pretty much. I do have a few more videos coming, but the core will be done after this video, and we can use our weapon inventory and have proper animations as well. So let's get into this. First of all, I have actually added a second pose animation. So I have a pistol pose and a rifle pose. So I can use those for now to have two different weapon animation sets. And we need to make sure that if we change our weapon, that we actually update our aim socket location. So if you are following this tutorial, you are probably using the procedural animation setup, and that works by getting the relative location from the aim socket that we added to our weapon, and we are putting the IK bone at this location and then manipulate that IK bone. So if we switch weapons, we need to make sure that we get the correct aim socket again, because the weapon will be in a different place and the aim socket will be in a different place. But there is a little bit of a problem with this, because we need to get this from the pose animation, so from this idle pose. And if we are switching weapons, we are probably playing an animation because we are lowering the weapon, and besides that we probably have some weapon sway and things like that, blend spaces. So you want to make sure that either you disable all of that stuff while you are switching weapons, and although that is doable, it will interfere with the animations and the flow of the character, the flow of the gameplay. So you can't while you're moving around and you're switching weapons, you have to disable your blend spaces, so that will look weird and things like that. So we're gonna fix that by creating a separate character to switch our weapons, to make a long story short. So we're gonna right click and we're gonna create a new blueprint, and that's going to be an actor. It doesn't have to be a character. And we're gonna call this our switch weapon character, although it's not a character. And in here we simply want to set up a fake character. So we're gonna get a mesh. So first let's get a scene component and make this our root. Then I'm gonna get a skeletal mesh, and it doesn't really matter where you place it. This is going to be our character mesh. And we also need to add our weapon mesh to this. So add another mesh, and this is going to be the first person weapon mesh. So this is attached to the character mesh. Now to set this up, we need to make sure that we attach it to the correct socket. So we need to get the meshes in here for a little while. So I'm going to select my arms mesh, first person mesh mannequin. And then I'm going to select the weapon and assign one of the guns that I'm using. Doesn't really matter at this point. And now I can select the correct socket. So I'm going to set it to my weapon grip. And now I can remove the meshes, and it should still have the correct socket in place here, so the attachment will still work. Now we don't really need to add anything in the event graph, but we do need to create two functions in here. So the first one we're going to create, and that's called update character pose. And let's give this 3 inputs. So the first one is going to be a skeletal mesh, and let's call this the character mesh. So that's a skeletal mesh. And then we need an animation asset, and we also need another skeletal mesh. So let's create 3 of them and rename the last one. That's going to be our weapon mesh. And then for the animation asset, I'm actually going to remove this, and I'm going to do this differently. So I'm going to drag in my character mesh over here. First, I'm going to get a set skeletal mesh node. So in case I have different character meshes, then I can also include the character mesh in here. So we want to connect the character mesh in here. Then let's drag off the character mesh again, and we're gonna set the animation. So set animation, and you should have this one. So for the animation, we are gonna drag this onto the function node, so it will create the animation to play, and that's an animation asset. And now we want to make sure that we play the animation as well, so we drag off here and we're gonna look for play. So the functions that we are using here, let's set this to looping, those respond to the character mesh settings, so the animation mode, and we should make sure that we set this to use animation asset. And then this should work. So that's what those functions do. And then we need to make sure that we update the weapon mesh as well. So let's get the first person weapon mesh in here and set the skeletal mesh. And plug this into the input node as well. So now we can set up this character to be exactly the same as our own character, only this will have the base pose. So now we can create a second function in here, and this will get our new aim socket. So get new aim socket location. Well, leave out location because it's actually a transform. Let's see, in here we are gonna get our first person weapon mesh, and we're gonna get the socket transform. And we want to get our aim socket from the weapon. And we also want to get our character mesh in here. And from the character mesh we want to get the socket transform. And this time we want to get IK hand root or IK hand gun. That shouldn't really matter, to be honest. And then we can make our new relative transform. So make relative transform, plug in both of them. And now if we add a return node in here, and we split the transform, we can simply return the location and the rotation for our new aim socket. So that's the aim socket location and the aim socket rotation. So we're done with this weapon switching character, so we can close this one down, and we need to make sure that we put it in the map somewhere. So let's open up our viewport. And it doesn't really matter where you put it as long as it's in the map. So for now I'm simply going to move this wall forward a little bit, and I'm going to hide him behind the wall. So there's my switch weapon character. And now we need to set him up in our own character. So let's open the first person character. And first let's start in the begin play. So let me close down all of this other stuff. There we go. Let me get my little cheat sheet as well. So let me see, we already have an animation instance in here, I think. Yes, we already have a cast to that in here, so that's fine. And now we want to make sure that we also get our switching weapon character in here. So I'm going to create a little bit of room. And I'm going to get all actors of class. And get my switch weapon character. And then there's only one of him, so I can simply get index 0 and promote that to a variable. Switch weapon character, and we have him set up as well. Let me see what we want to do next. Now we could pretty much go to the end of this chain over here, and I think Let's see, in which order are we going to do this? I think we want to add it in here for now. So I'm gonna drag in my switch weapon character and I'm gonna update my pose. So update character pose. And I want to make sure that I'm playing my pistol animation. So for now I'm simply gonna plug him in right here. So new animation to play pistol pose, character mesh, mesh mannequin and the pistol. And then over here I can drag in my switch weapon character again. And I can get the new aim socket. And then I'm gonna drag in my animation instance, and from here I can simply set the aim socket location and rotation. So this should work. So let me see if we go into the animation blueprint right now. Then we can get rid of our aim socket stuff. So over here, set aim socket, we're gonna delete this function and plug this in directly. And we're gonna delete the aim socket function over here as well because we don't need it. And now this should still work, so we should still be able to aim down sight. And obviously we are not. So let me double check. Okay, we were simply a little bit too fast because we need to update the character and it needs to update the pose and the animation and stuff like that. So if we add a little delay in here, 0.05 seconds already works. So right now everything works again. So we have the new aim socket set up in place. So now we can make sure that if we switch weapon that all of this stuff gets applied, and we're also going to assign the correct animations. So to do that we need to create a few more variables and obviously a data table and a structure again. So the first thing we need is a enumeration. So let me see, I'm going to go into my weapons folder and I'm going to create a new enumeration. And this is going to be my pose animations enum. And I'm simply going to add one enum for all of the weapons that I have. So for now I'm just going to add two, the pistol and the rifle. And save it. And we are good to go in here. And now we need to create a structure where we are going to store all of the variables. So let's go to blueprints and create a structure. And this is going to be my weapons animations structure. And if we open this up, we need to add a bunch of stuff in here. So let me get my cheat sheet. So first of all, we want to get the weapon mesh in here. Weapon mesh, and that's a skeletal mesh. Then we need our pose animation enum. So that's the one we created a few seconds ago. The pose animation enumeration, and then we need the actual pose animation that we are using. So pose animation, and that's an animation sequence. And after that we want to add the idle, walking and all those kinds of animations. So in our case we are using vector curves if you are following the tutorial. And otherwise you can just add your animation montages in here. So the first one is going to be my idle curve animation. And that's a vector curve array. And this is going to have two indexes. So as I mentioned in the beginning of this tutorial a few videos ago, translation and rotation curves for one animation, and the first index of my array will always be the translation curve and the second index will always be the rotation curve. So that's just a rule you have to stick with. So we have the idle, so let's create walking. And that's a curve vector array, so that's fine. We have a lower animation in place as well, so lower. And then we have our blend spaces, so I'm also gonna store them in here, so they will be specific for each weapon as well. So blend space direction. And those are curve vectors, so that's fine. And we have a blend space for turning. Oh. And a blend space for looking. And then I also have a crouch offset stored in a vector, so I'm also gonna put that in here. So everything that's animation related will be in this structure. So the crouch offset, and that's just a translation. So I can make this one single curve vector, and that should work. Now we can close our structure, and we need to make sure that we create a data table for this as well. So miscellaneous data table, and select our weapon animation structure. Click OK, and that's our weapon anim table. So if we create the rows in the same fashion as we do for our weapons, so we need to make sure that the names match. So pistol, and then we can simply assign the stuff we need to. So we have our pistol mesh in here, the pose animation is pistol, the actual animation is our pistol pose, and then we're gonna set the curve animations. So let's see, idle, translation, and rotation. And it didn't set the array elements. I probably forgot, so let me do that in the structure. So they are 2 elements by default. That's just a little bit easier. So the idle should be in place. Then we have our walking animation, translation and rotation again. Set up our lower animation. And obviously our blend spaces. So let's see, direction, translation, direction, rotation, and for the turning and looking I'm only using rotators. So look, turn rotation over here, and the look rotation for the last one, and last but not least the crouch offset. So we are good to go in here. Now we can simply duplicate this row and set this to rifle. And all we need to change right now is the rifle pose animation and the pose animation enumeration. So because we are using the procedural animations, we could simply use the same animation set, because right now I only have one animation set available. So this works fine. The only downside is the animations will look the same. So let's see, we have that set up. And now we need to make sure that everything works in our character. So let's open up our first person character and create a few variables again, because we don't have enough of them already. So let's see, my little cheat sheet, and we're gonna create a new variable, and that's our current weapon crouch offset. This is a vector. And we have our current weapon pose animation. And that's actually the enumeration, so the pose anim enum. And we're also going to create variables for our animations. So that's the current weapon idle animation. And that's actually my curve animation, so curve vector. And that's an array. And let me compile. I shouldn't have to do that. So then we can duplicate this, and that's going to be my walk animation. And duplicate it again for the lower animation. And I think we should be good to go. So we already had the fire animation stored in our weapon setup. So in the other data table, you could move it over to the animation table. I'm gonna do that later. Not gonna bother with it right now, but to make things a little bit cleaner, you can make sure all of the animations are in one place. So let me see, we need to create a new function in our player to set everything up. So I'm going to create a new function in here and call setup weapon animations. Weapon animations. And we need to give it a weapon row name. So we can get the stuff from our data table. So weapon row name. And that's a name variable. And now we want to get our data table row. And make sure that we select our animation data table. Let's split the struct bin over here or break the result. Okay, you need to drag in the correct variable. There we go. And now we're gonna get the stuff from our switch weapon character in here. So let's go to the begin play, and instead of calling this over here, we're simply gonna get rid of it. And we're gonna do that over here. So plug this in, get your switch weapon character as the target. So the character mesh, that's just one mesh in my case, so I'm not gonna connect it up. And now I'm gonna connect the weapon mesh and the pose animation from the data table. And now all we need to do is set our animations up. So we're gonna get our idle animation, store it in the variable, and make sure that we start playing it. So I think we have this stuff set up over here. So for the animation idle timeline and for the animation walk timeline. And we're gonna get rid of that in begin play and move that over to the weapon animation setup. So we're gonna set up our animation timeline for the length mode and the animation track to play, and we need to make sure that we assign the correct curves in here. So let's drag off here and do the set vector curve. And we want to set this to our idle translation. And the curve is going to be the first index from our idle animation array. So get a copy and plug this in here. And the idle translation refers to the timeline we are using. So if I go to the components over here, we have the idle timeline. And over here we have idle translation curve and idle rotation curve. And we are setting those to our own curves. So we need to do this again, but this time for the rotation. And make sure that we also plug in the correct timeline over here. So this is connected to all three of the nodes, and this should be index 1 for the rotation. Then we're going to set the length mode to the last keyframe so it updates to the correct length, and we're going to play the track. And now we need to do the same for the walking animation track, because we're playing that from the start already and we're blending that out depending on our velocity. So we can simply set it over here and make sure that we get the correct variables. And then do everything over here again, but for the correct timeline and the correct tracks. So plug this in, get the correct walking timeline over here, and make sure that the track names are good. So walk translation, walk rotation. There we go, and we should make sure that we get the correct variable over here. And then we're going to update the length mode and play the track. And that's for the walking timeline, so that's fine. And for the other animations, we can simply store them right in the variable and don't need to do anything with it right now. So for the lower animation, we can simply get the setter and hook it up. And make sure that we plug this in. And the blend spaces, I'm gonna set those directly in my animation instance. So I'm gonna drag in the animation instance reference over here. Drag off here, and I'm gonna set my blend space direction translation, and I'm also gonna set my blend space direction rotation, and simply drag off here and get the first index for the translation and the second index for the rotation. And now I need to do the same thing for the turning and looking blend space. So set blend space turn and the blend space look. And plug those in and make sure that you get the second index from those arrays so that you actually get the rotation curves for the rotation blend space. And that should work. And then all we have left is the crouch offset. So we're going to go back to our begin play where we have the crouch offset here, and we're going to get rid of it. And then go back over here and paste it in here. And now we can delete that crouch curve, get this curve in here, and plug it into this node. And that should work fine. So I'm not sure if we are using the crouch curve variable somewhere else. So we might want to double check. No, we don't, so we can actually get rid of this as well. There we go. And this should do it for the setup for our animations. So we can add a return node, compile and save. And now if we go back to our begin play, we can make sure that all of this matches up. So the first thing we want to do is get our HUD, that's fine. Then we get the animation instance and a switch weapon character. So that's this part. And that's also fine, so we can connect it up right here. And after that we want to set up our weapon inventory and all that kind of stuff. So over here, the first thing we want to do is set the inventory size, so that's what this function does. Then we're going to add 2 weapons to our inventory so we can switch between them. So pistol index 0, rifle index 1. Then we're going to set up the weapon that's in inventory index 0. We're going to set up the recoil for it, but in this case we also want to set up the new weapon animation function. So we're going to go to the functions, drag in our setup weapon animations, and you want to do this somewhere at the beginning preferably, because this will also update our switch weapon character. So this will give us a little bit of time to make sure that the pose animation of that character is updated. And now after we set the switch weapon animations in here, we're gonna add a little bit of room, and we need to open our animation blueprint, and we're gonna create our pose animation enum in here. So pose animation enum, and that's our pose enum that we created. Compile and save. And we're gonna get the reference to our animation instance and set our pose animation enum. and we're gonna set it to our current weapon pose animation. So in the setup weapon animation function, we updated the pose animation enum, so this is up to date for our new weapon. But I don't immediately set it in this function because in case of lowering a weapon, for example, you want to lower the weapon first, and when it's off screen you want to set the pose animation, and that will also switch the pose or the idle. So that's why I'm doing this in a separate node and not inside this function, but because this is begin play we can do it immediately. So setup animations, set pose animation, setup weapon, setup recoil, get the correct aim socket, and our weapon is good to go. So let me see, we could go into our animation blueprint and get rid of the stuff that sets our blend spaces. So let me see. Okay, I'm back. So we didn't actually set them in a function or something, we just set the default values, so we can get rid of those. And that way we know our new function is working and they are actually updating. So let's get rid of the default values in the animation blueprint for your blend spaces. And you could do pretty much the same for the animations in here. They don't have default, so that should be fine. Fire animation doesn't have a default. Okay, so I think we should be good to go, and let's give this a little test. Okay, we are not quite there yet, obviously. We need to go into our animation blueprint, and if we go to the animation graph, we are going all the way to the beginning over here. Disconnect the idle, the pistol pose, and we're gonna get our new pose animation enum. And from here we're gonna blend. So blend on it should normally give the correct one. So blend poses. Oh come on pose anim. So the name is probably not a really good choice, but okay. This one, we want this one. So blend poses on the pose animation enum. And if you right click on this node, you can add the enumerators. So if you click on the pistol, it will add a pistol pin. If you click on the rifle, it will add a pin. And now we can simply plug in the correct animations for those enumerators. So you could set it up like this and leave the default pin empty. You will get a little note, but it doesn't really matter. And now the last thing we need to do is make sure that our switch weapon event actually updates all of this stuff. So let's move it somewhere where we have a little bit more room. And we also want to play our animations when we are switching weapons. So let me see, the first thing that we are going to do is check to what index we are switching, so that's actually fine. We can leave this in place. And then we want to play our lower animation first. So let's get rid of the setup weapon, and over here we're going to call our play curve animation function and plug in the lower animation. So while this animation is playing, I'm gonna call my setup weapon animation function for the new weapon. So this one, and we can simply get the weapon inventory names and then get the active index. So get a copy of our current weapon index. So we already changed the index over here. So the new index we want to switch to is already updated in this variable. So we're going to set up the animations for the new weapon. Then we're going to add a delay for the length of the lower animation. So it plays the entire animation. And then when the weapon is off screen, we're going to set the pose animation in our animation instance. So get the animation instance in here and set our pose animation enum. So this will update the idle pose, and we want to plug in the current weapon pose animation. And after that we want to call our setup weapon. So all of the fire times, damage and all that kind of stuff is being updated. And after that, we want to set up the recoil. So also drag that node in here and plug in the correct row name. And after that, we can get our new aim socket. So we want to get our switch weapon character in here and get the new aim socket for the new weapon. And we are going to store this in our animation instance. So get the animation instance, set new aim socket, location and rotation. There we go. And now all we need to do is play a race animation. So we can grab the play curve animation over here and simply play the animation in reverse. And the lower animation is already updated to our new weapon, so that should work. And because we already set the setup which weapon character setup over here in the animation node before the delay, this has plenty of time to update, so we can just call our that new aim socket without adding any weights or things like that, and set the new aim socket in the animation blueprint. So I think this could work. Probably I screwed up something because I always tend to do, but oh well. So it only doesn't play the correct pose animation. So let me see, did I actually gave the correct value? So if I go to my weapon animation table for the rifle, I did set it to rifle over here, rifle pose. So strangely enough, this is set to the pistol, so this should be the rifle. So then the issue could be in my animation blueprint. Oh, come on. Pistol pose, rifle pose, pose animation enum. Okay, so why is this not updating? Well, we need to plug in the weapon row name over here probably. So let's see if that helps. And that works. So right now we can ADS with the rifle, and if we switch weapon we can ADS with the pistol as well. So our aim socket is being updated, and you can see the pose animation is also updating, so that's working. And although I'm not playing any different animations, the animations still work, so this should work. You can just plug in a few other animations for your other weapon and you should have an inventory setup. So I think I got everything covered, and from this setup we are actually going to continue to make my dual wield animation setup. So if you have everything set up like this, it's actually not too hard to add dual wielding to it. So that's probably where we're going to continue with this series. But for now, thanks for watching, everybody. If you enjoyed the video, then please consider leaving a like. And if you would like, you could also join the gamedev raw Discord if you want to ask some questions about a video, or if you just want to show off something you made, or if you want to get one of my project files. You can simply join the Discord, and I'll see you guys in there. And girls. So thanks for watching, everybody. Talk to you later. Bye bye.